The Duke sent away the girl he called plain. Years later, she's the only woman he can't have. Snowflakes, sharp as tiny crystal daggers, drifted lazily in the air, settling on the frozen cobblestones like a blanket of silver. Within the great hall of Castle Ravencroft, candles flickered against the dark stone walls, casting shadows that seemed almost alive. It was here, among the towering banners of family crests and the cold echo of nobility, that Alara stood. She was young, barely 17, but already familiar with the sting of comparison. Every courtier, from the haughty ladies in silk to the polished young men learning the art of diplomacy, seemed to measure her in whispered judgments. Her hair was chestnut, her eyes a muted green, her frame small and unassuming. Not ugly, certainly, yet never remarkable enough to draw the praise of the court. And the Duke of Eldoria, Lord Alastair Ravencroft, was as brilliant as he was proud. His gaze alone could command obedience, and his words cut sharper than a master's blade. Handsome, clever, and cruelly honest, he carried himself like a king already crowned, even as the duchy's responsibilities weighed upon his shoulders. When he looked at Alara, he saw what the court called plainness, and yet, in truth, there was something quieter, something deeper, that he had never cared to see. Alara had known the moment he dismissed her. It had been in the great library, sunlight spilling across dust moats and ancient tomes. He had leaned against the edge of a marble table, speaking to her with a patience that did not mask disdain. "You are sufficient, perhaps," he said, his words precise, almost surgical. "But this court demands more than sufficiency. It demands presence, beauty, and brilliance. You lack the first, and the other two will never come to you." She had blinked, hurt and angry in equal measure. The words were not cruel in tone, only in truth. And in that moment, Alara understood she was no one's choice. "You do not see me, my lord," she whispered almost to herself, though he heard every word. He shrugged, indifferent. "I see exactly what is necessary, and what is necessary is not you." The decision came swiftly. She was to be married off to a minor noble, far from the duchy, where no one could witness the shame of her rejection. The preparations were hurried. A carriage was arranged, servants packed her belongings, and her parents, proud yet fearful of Alastair's temper, said nothing but nodded. The night before her departure, she wandered the castle gardens alone. Snow crunched under her boots, the moonlight painting silver paths over frost-kissed flowers. She paused by a frozen fountain, its stone statues half hidden in ice. The water, trapped beneath, glimmered like a memory. "I could have been anything," she murmured to the stars, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "I could have been someone." Her reflection in the ice was pale, but her eyes, green, bright, defiant, stared back with a fire the Duke would never see. It was a fire that would grow in the years to come, a quiet strength that could bend hearts and will alike. The carriage came at dawn. She stood at the threshold of the great hall, her cloak drawn tight against the cold, and looked back at the castle one last time. The Duke stood on the balcony above, framed by the rising sun, his silhouette tall and perfect against the fiery sky. She met his gaze for a fleeting moment, hoping for regret, for any sign of remorse, and found nothing. Nothing but indifference. The wheels turned. The carriage rattled along the frozen path, and Alara felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. She was leaving the man who had broken her heart, yet also the place that had been her home, her prison, and her crucible. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. In her new home, she learned to navigate the subtle games of another court, one less grand but no less calculating. Yet she found herself alone in quiet chambers, her thoughts returning again and again to the man she had once called the Duke. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a new power began to awaken within her. It started as a whisper in the mind, a sense of knowing others' feelings before they spoke, a subtle understanding of hidden intentions. At first, she feared it, thinking herself mad. But the gift, if it could be called that, grew with each passing year. Alara learned to shape it, control it, and guard it. By the time she was 24, she was no longer the plain, timid girl dismissed by the Duke. She had become a woman of quiet authority, whose presence commanded attention without need of beauty or titles. She was formidable, yet the past never truly lets go. News from the duchy trickled in through letters and travelers. She heard of wars narrowly avoided, of political marriages, of alliances formed and broken. And like a ghost in the corners of her mind, she heard his name, Alistair Ravenscroft, the Duke she had loved and who had loved in some twisted, unspoken way. It was during one of those gray winter mornings, as snow fell in silent sheets over the world, that a messenger arrived at her estate with news that would change everything. "The Duke of Eldoria requests an audience," the messenger said, bowing low. His eyes flickered nervously to hers. He insists it be immediate." Alara's pulse quickened. Part of her wanted to laugh, to refuse outright. She had no desire to see the man who had once dismissed her. And yet, something in her chest twisted with anticipation, fear, and a strange, undeniable longing. That evening, she rode in silence to the northern castle, the road stretching like a silver ribbon beneath the moon. The wind bit at her cheeks, and the only sound was the rhythmic thrum of hooves against packed snow. When she arrived, the castle loomed like a dark sentinel, its towers shrouded in mist. Alistair met her in the great hall, his expression unreadable, though the flicker of candlelight revealed a tightness around his jaw, a tension in his shoulders. He had changed in the years since she left, older, sharper, more commanding, but the same pride, the same unyielding presence remained. "Alara," he said, his voice low, resonant, "you have returned." She inclined her head politely. "I have, at your request, Duke Ravenscroft." For a moment, silence stretched between them, taut and electric. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across their faces, and in those shadows, memories of a rejection long past lingered like ghosts. "You have grown," he said finally, as if testing the truth of his own eyes, "not just in appearance but presence." Alara allowed a small, controlled smile. "I suppose some things do change with time." The Duke frowned, a subtle tension in his expression. "Time does not always forgive, nor does it heal." "Perhaps," she replied, her voice calm, steady, "or perhaps it teaches. Some of us learn more in exile than we ever could in comfort." He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time there was something in his eyes that she had never seen before, recognition, regret, and a spark of longing that he could not yet name. But before he could speak, the hall doors opened and the Duke's advisors entered, bringing news of a political threat that required immediate attention. The moment passed, fragile and fleeting. Alara was left with the echo of his gaze, a memory that would burn in her mind for years to come. That night, as she retired to her chamber in the castle, she stood by the window and looked out over the snowy battlements. The wind carried the scent of pine and frost, and the moon hung low, a silver witness to the pain and the longing that had never truly left her heart. She whispered into the cold night, a vow to herself and perhaps to him, though he could never hear it. "Never again will I be dismissed. Never again will I be unseen. And someday you will know what you have lost." The Duke, in his own chambers, stared at the flickering fire, unaware that the woman he had called plain was no longer the girl he could disregard. Somewhere beyond the frost and shadow, she was becoming unstoppable, her presence a force he could neither control nor resist. And deep down, though he would not admit it, that thought unsettled him far more than any enemy at his gates ever could. Outside, the northern wind continued its song, carrying the promise of storms to come. And somewhere in the quiet between snowflakes, fate had begun to turn. Winter had passed, leaving the Duchy of Eldoria in the hesitant bloom of early spring. Snow melted slowly along the frozen rivers, revealing the dark waters beneath, and the trees began to shake off their icy coverings. Castle Ravenscroft stood like a sentinel against the rising sun, its towers piercing the morning sky, a fortress of stone and shadow. It had been years since Alara's departure, and yet the castle seemed unchanged, its walls still heavy with pride, its halls still echoing with the Duke's commands. Alara returned not with the timid uncertainty of a girl, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had endured exile and emerged with purpose. Her hair, once unremarkable, now shone with a deep chestnut glow, catching the sunlight like polished wood. Her eyes, sharp and perceptive, seemed to see beyond the surface of people, reading their desires, fears, and secrets. Her presence commanded attention not because of beauty alone, but because of the confidence she carried, like a force of nature. As her carriage approached the castle gates, the guards paused in surprise, unsure whether to greet her as a visitor or to treat her with caution. The word of her return had spread faster than the melting snow. Rumors of her intelligence, her mysterious abilities, and her sharp wit had reached even the highest towers of Eldoria. Alara dismounted, her cloak brushing the cobblestones, and walked toward the grand entrance. She had no illusions of comfort. She knew the Duke would be observing, weighing her every step with that careful, unrelenting gaze he had perfected over years of leadership. And indeed, as she entered the great hall, there he stood. Alastair Ravencroft, the Duke, towered above his advisors, his posture commanding attention even among nobles. His eyes, dark and calculating, flickered toward her immediately. Recognition sparked, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed to shrink around them. "Alara," he said, his voice low and measured, as if he were testing the waters of a dangerous river. "You have returned sooner than I expected." "I returned because it was necessary, Duke Ravencroft," she replied, her tone calm yet firm. "It seems you require my counsel." He studied her silently, noting how she had grown, how her presence now carried weight that she had never possessed before. For years he had thought her insignificant, a simple girl dismissed without thought, and yet now she was different. "Yes," he said finally, his voice sharper. "There are matters at court that demand careful judgment, matters that cannot be trusted to the inexperienced." Alara allowed a small, controlled smile. "Experience can be gained if one is willing to learn." Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, an unspoken tension passed between them, a mixture of old wounds, recognition, and something neither dared to name. The Duke, though a man of reason and command, felt it pull at him, like a current he could neither resist nor fully understand. In the days that followed, Alara moved through the castle with quiet grace, observing and advising. The court had grown more political and dangerous in her absence. Rival nobles whispered behind closed doors, plotting to weaken the Duke's influence and claim power for themselves. Alara, though new to this game, saw the lines of strategy clearly, reading the intentions of those around her like an open book. Her counsel soon proved indispensable. When the Duke faced a disagreement over land disputes, Alara suggested compromises that allowed him to retain authority without sacrificing honor. When a merchant threatened to withdraw supplies critical to the duchy, she negotiated with subtlety, revealing a mind sharpened by years of exile and struggle. Yet for all her usefulness, Alara remained distant from the Duke. She had returned not for love or forgiveness, but because necessity had drawn her to him. Each interaction between them was charged, a dance of subtle power and unspoken feelings. Every glance held a shadow of the past, every word was layered with meaning. One evening, the Duke invited her to walk along the castle walls. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of new leaves and the promise of spring. Moonlight bathed the stone battlements, and the city below sparkled like scattered stars. "You have changed," Alastair said, breaking the silence. "Not just in appearance, but in your mind. You command more than you did before." Alara looked out over the city, her expression thoughtful. "I had to. Life in exile teaches lessons that comfort never could. I have learned to trust myself and to fear very little." He studied her profile, the sharp line of her jaw, the determination in her gaze. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of regret, the knowledge that he had dismissed someone who had become powerful and wise, someone who could challenge him in ways he had never imagined. "You were different when you left," he said softly. "I did not see the strength in you, the fire beneath your calm." "I suppose you did not know how to look," she replied, her tone measured. "Or perhaps you preferred not to see." The tension between them was like a living thing, twisting and curling around every word. The Duke's pride bristled, yet his curiosity, his fascination, grew with every passing moment. He had underestimated her once. The thought of underestimating her again was unbearable. As the days turned to weeks, political intrigue grew more dangerous. A noble family long loyal to the Duke had secretly allied with rival lords, aiming to overthrow him and seize his lands. Ilara, who had observed the subtle signals, warned him in time, preventing disaster. The Duke, though grateful, felt a growing unease. Her abilities, her insight, and her quiet authority reminded him of his own limitations. During a council meeting, tension reached its peak. Alistair's advisors debated the future of a contested border, voices rising and tempers flaring. Ilara remained silent, listening. Then, when all had spoken, she offered a solution that none had considered, a path that preserved the Duke's honor, the duchy's strength, and the fragile peace among neighboring lands. The council fell silent. Even the Duke, who prided himself on foresight, could not deny the brilliance of her suggestion. "Very well," he said finally, his voice calm but edged with something deeper. "We shall proceed as you say." Ilara inclined her head, accepting neither praise nor thanks. Her eyes, however, met his briefly, and in that glance she conveyed both warning and promise. She was no longer the girl he could control. That night, Ilara stood at her window, looking out over the moonlit city. Her thoughts wandered to the Duke, to the man who had once dismissed her and now relied upon her. A strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow filled her heart. She had returned stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever, yet the memory of rejection lingered like a shadow. Meanwhile, in his chambers, the Duke paced. He could not deny it. Ilara's return had unsettled him in ways he had not anticipated. Her presence was a challenge to his authority, a reminder of past arrogance, and yet a fascination he could not resist. Pride warred with desire, caution with longing. He knew that she was the only woman who could never truly belong to him, yet he could not tear his thoughts away. Days later, an unexpected event forced their paths together in a way that neither could ignore. A royal gala, meant to celebrate the alliance between Eldoria and a neighboring duchy, brought nobles from far and wide. The hall was filled with laughter, music, and the glitter of candlelight on jewels. Ilara entered with measured grace, commanding attention without effort. Whispers followed her, admiration and envy mingling in the air. Alistair watched her from across the room, his chest tight, his mind racing. She was radiant, yes, but more than that, she was untouchable. Every gesture was precise, every glance deliberate. She was no longer the girl he could dismiss. She was a force, a presence that demanded respect and caution. He approached her cautiously, aware that any misstep could shatter the fragile balance between them. "You have captivated the court," he said quietly, his voice low so only she could hear. Ilara smiled, a subtle curve of her lips, neither warm nor cold but commanding. "I merely observe, Duke. Captivation is in the eyes of the beholder, is it not?" Their words were polite, yet charged, layered with the tension of years lost and opportunities squandered. Around them, the court continued its revelry, oblivious to the silent battle of wills taking place in the space between two people who had once been bound by fate. But as the evening wore on, the gala descended into chaos. Rumors of treachery reached the Duke mid-celebration. A rival noble had attempted to sway key allies to his side, threatening the delicate balance of power. The court erupted in confusion. whispers turning to accusations, and panic spread like wildfire. Alara moved through the chaos with quiet authority, guiding the Duke and his advisors, calming the nobles, and revealing the subtle manipulations that had caused the unrest. Her insight and presence proved invaluable, saving not only the evening but the Duke's reputation and influence. As the night ended and the court dispersed, Alastair and Alara found themselves alone in the deserted Great Hall. Candlelight flickered against the walls, casting long shadows. The tension between them was palpable, the air heavy with unspoken words and unsaid desires. "You have returned," the Duke said finally, his voice softer, almost vulnerable. "Not just in body, but in power. You are no longer the girl I once dismissed. You are beyond my control." Alara met his gaze, steady and unyielding. "And you have changed as well, Duke. Pride still suits you, but caution now tempers it. You have learned the weight of responsibility, yet you underestimate the lessons of time." A silence fell, broken only by the soft echo of footsteps outside. In that quiet, they both understood. The game between them had only just begun, and neither could predict its outcome. The northern wind whispered through the open windows, carrying the scent of frost and the promise of storms to come. And somewhere, deep within the castle, both the Duke and the woman he had once sent away felt the pull of destiny, the unspoken tension that would shape the course of their lives and their hearts. The northern sky was heavy with storm clouds, shadows stretching long across the Duchy of Eldoria. Castle Ravencroft seemed darker than usual, its towers piercing the gray heavens like silent sentinels. The court buzzed with quiet tension. Rumors of betrayal and secret alliances spread like wildfire, and Alastair Ravencroft, the Duke, moved through his halls with measured caution. Alara had become more than a visitor or advisor. She was now indispensable. Every plan, every decision, every negotiation seemed to require her insight. Yet her presence brought more than guidance. It brought unease. Alastair could not ignore the way her eyes followed him with calm intensity, as if she could see not only his actions but the thoughts behind them. It unsettled him, yet drew him in like a tide he could not resist. It was during a night of rare clarity, when the full moon rose above the towers, that the Duke discovered the true extent of Alara's transformation. She had vanished from the castle without warning, leaving behind only a cryptic note. "If you follow, beware the shadow that waits. Only those who surrender pride may walk unbroken." Alastair, heart pounding with equal measures of fear and longing, did not hesitate. He mounted his horse and rode into the northern forests, where darkness and mist coiled around the twisted trunks of ancient trees. Every step he took seemed guided by some invisible force, pulling him deeper into the wilderness. Hours later, he reached a clearing illuminated by the silver glow of the moon. In the center stood Alara, her cloak drawn around her, eyes glowing faintly with an unearthly light. Around her the air shimmered, thick with a strange, magical energy that made the hair on his arms stand on end. "You have followed," she said, her voice calm but edged with power. "Few would dare." "I do not fear the forest nor your powers," Alastair replied, dismounting. "I only fear losing you again." Alara's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You have already lost me once, Duke. Do not mistake my presence for forgiveness." He stepped closer, feeling the weight of her words, the truth in her warning. "I would face any danger to make right the wrongs of the past. Tell me what I must do." Her eyes flickered with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "The curse that binds me is ancient, older than this castle, older than your line. It is a curse of pride and neglect, woven by forces that punish those who dismiss what they cannot see. I cannot break it alone. You must choose. Pride will destroy us both. Humility may save me, but the cost is yours to bear." Alastair felt a chill run through him. Pride was his armor, the foundation of his authority. To cast it aside was to risk everything he had built. And yet he could not leave her here, bound by magic and shadow. "I will do what is necessary," he said, voice firm. "Tell me what I must sacrifice." Alara reached out, her fingers brushing the air between them, though they did not touch. "You must surrender control, even of your own destiny. You must admit your past errors, acknowledge the pain you caused, and trust me, fully. Only then can the curse be weakened." Alistair hesitated, his mind spinning. To surrender control, even for her, was unthinkable. And yet, he felt the weight of years, the emptiness of lost time, the ache of longing he could no longer deny. Slowly, he nodded. I accept," he whispered, the words tasting strange on his tongue. "I was wrong. I dismissed you, I underestimated you, I failed to see the strength in you. I love you, Alara, always have." The air shimmered violently, as if reacting to his confession. Alara's eyes glowed brighter, and the shadows surrounding her writhed like living things. The curse, ancient and cruel, tested the sincerity of his words. Alistair's chest tightened. The forest seemed to pulse with magic, and he felt an invisible weight pressing down on him. "Your words must match your actions," Alara said softly. "The curse will test you, Duke. Every step you take, every thought you harbor will be judged. Fail, and you may lose more than you realize." "I will not fail," he said, determination flaring in his chest. "I will do whatever is required." For hours they moved together through the forest, the night air thick with enchantment. Shadows seemed to twist around them, whispering doubts and fears. At one point the Duke found himself facing a vision of Alara as a child, standing alone in the castle garden, heartbroken and small. The Duke's own younger self appeared beside him, proud and careless, laughing at her pain. Alistair fell to his knees, the weight of memory crushing him. "I was blind," he whispered. "I see now what I lost, what I caused. I am sorry. Forgive me." The shadows writhed and recoiled, testing the truth of his remorse. Alara stepped forward, her hand outstretched, guiding him through the vision. "You must accept that this pain is not yours alone to bear. Learn humility, Duke. Only through surrender can you release the chains that bind me." Days and nights blurred as the Duke faced illusions, memories and tests that challenged both heart and mind. Every trial forced him to confront his pride, his mistakes, and the depth of his feelings for Alara. And through it all, she remained a calm, steady presence, guiding him with quiet authority. At last they reached a hidden glade deep within the forest. A pool of crystal water shimmered in the moonlight, its surface still except for the faint ripple of magic. Alara stood at the edge, the glow of her eyes softening. "This is the final test," she said. "Step into the water, Duke. Trust in me and in the truth of your words. Only then can the curse be broken." Alistair hesitated, looking into the depths. The water reflected not only his face, but the memory of every choice he had made, every failure, every moment of pride that had kept him from her. He felt the pull of fear, the instinct to hold on to control. And yet, he also felt something stronger, the desire to protect her, to honor her, to make right what had been wrong for so long. With a steady breath, he stepped forward, letting the cold water lap at his boots. Each step forward seemed to strip away a layer of arrogance, a fragment of pride. By the time he reached the center, he was bare of pretense, raw in his remorse and longing. Alara stepped beside him, her hand finally brushing his. The contact was electric but gentle, a promise of trust and redemption. "You have done well," she whispered. "Now surrender fully, trust that I will guide us both." Alistair closed his eyes, letting go of fear, of control, of every doubt. The water around them shimmered and pulsed, glowing brighter with every heartbeat. Shadows writhed and twisted, then dissolved, leaving the glade bathed in silver light. The curse, ancient and cruel, had been challenged, and for now defeated. When he opened his eyes, he saw Alara standing beside him, her hair catching the moonlight, her eyes soft and glowing. The forest seemed still, the air calm. For the first time in years, he felt a peace he had never known. Yet even in that moment, the weight of the past lingered. The Duke realized that redemption was not simple, and that love, even the love that had brought them together, was not without its complications. He had earned her trust, but she remained untouchable in ways that demanded patience, respect, and humility. "Thank you," he said, voice low, "for everything, for trusting me and for forgiving me even if only a little." Alara smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and caution. "Forgiveness is not given lightly, Duke, and love is earned, not demanded. Remember that." The forest seemed to breathe around them, the moon casting silver light over the clearing. In that quiet, Alistair understood that their journey was far from over. The curse had been broken, but the world outside still demanded vigilance, wisdom, and courage. And the bond between them, fragile yet unbreakable, had only begun to take shape. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight touched the treetops, painting the glade with gold. Ilara and the Duke returned to the castle, side by side, their steps measured, their hearts heavy with the lessons of the night. They knew that challenges awaited, political threats, court intrigue, and the lingering shadows of the past, but they also knew that together they had begun to change. And somewhere deep in the castle, in the silent corridors and shadowed towers, whispers of magic lingered, a reminder that destiny, pride, and love were never simple, and that the bond between the Duke and the woman he had once sent away was now stronger than any curse. End of part III cliffhanger. Ilara remained both powerful and cautious, and their relationship, full of longing and trust, faced the challenge of the outside world as well as the unspoken tension between them. Spring had come in full force to the Duchy of Eldoria. The snow had melted entirely, and the castle gardens were alive with the color of blooming flowers. Birds filled the air with song, and the rivers, once frozen, now ran clear and swift. Yet inside Castle Ravencroft, a tension lingered, heavy and persistent. The curse had been broken, but danger had not fully passed. Politics, ambition, and lingering grudges made every day a test of strength and wisdom. Ilara moved through the halls with quiet authority, her presence now fully recognized by the courtiers. She had changed not only herself but the atmosphere of the castle. Where once whispers of doubt and fear had spread, now there was respect, tinged with awe. Her power, both magical and personal, was undeniable, yet she wielded it with patience and caution. Alistair observed her constantly, sometimes openly, sometimes in stolen moments. He had learned humility, the value of listening, and the cost of pride. Yet even as he had changed, he knew there were depths to her spirit he had yet to touch. She was no longer the girl he had dismissed, nor the woman he could command. She was a force, a presence beyond his control, and it both frightened and thrilled him. One morning, a messenger arrived from a neighboring duchy, bearing troubling news. A rival noble, dissatisfied with previous negotiations, had rallied allies and was marching toward the borders of Eldoria. The Duke's advisors panicked, but Ilara remained calm, her eyes sharp and calculating. "We must act carefully," she said, voice steady. "Force alone will not win this. Strategy, patience, and understanding the ambitions of others are our weapons." Alistair nodded. He trusted her judgment, but he also felt the pull of his own instincts. Together, they began to prepare, blending the Duke's authority and Alara's insight into a plan that could protect the duchy without unnecessary bloodshed. In the days that followed, tension grew. Courtiers whispered in corners, plotting to exploit any weakness. The rival nobles' forces drew closer, and every decision carried weighty consequences. Ilara and the Duke worked side by side, their interactions charged with unspoken emotion. Each glance, each touch, each exchange of words held layers of meaning, longing, caution, and respect intertwined. One evening, as they reviewed plans in the strategy room, Alistair finally broke the silence that had been building between them. "Ilara," he said, voice low, "I owe you more than I can say. You saved the duchy, guided me, and you have taught me what it means to be both strong and humble." Alara looked up from the maps, her eyes meeting his. "You have learned much, Duke. But there is still more to understand. Power is not just authority, it is the responsibility to protect, to guide, and to respect those who stand beside you." "I see that now," he replied, stepping closer. "And I see you, truly. Not as I once thought, not as someone to be dismissed, but as someone who is beyond measure." Her eyes softened just slightly. "Words are not enough. Actions must follow." Alistair nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He had proven himself in the trials of the forest, but now he would need to demonstrate his commitment in the real world, against real threats. The rival forces arrived at the northern border at dawn. The skies were gray, the wind carrying the scent of rain and iron. Soldiers lined the walls of Eldoria, and the tension was palpable. Alistair and Alara stood together atop the battlements, looking out at the distant banners of the approaching enemy. "You know our strategy?" Alistair asked. "I know their weaknesses," she replied. "We will not fight as equals. We will fight as those who understand both the enemy and ourselves. Cunning, not brute force, will decide this day." The battle that followed was swift, precise, and remarkable. Alara's guidance allowed the Duke to avoid unnecessary conflict, outmaneuver the enemy, and preserve the lives of his people. Every decision reflected the careful blend of his authority and her insight. By midday, the rival forces had been forced to retreat, their plans undone without a single unnecessary loss. As the sun broke through the clouds, the Duke turned to Alara. Relief and gratitude filled his eyes, but beneath it lay something more, something raw and vulnerable. "You have saved more than the duchy," he said quietly. "You have saved me." Alara's gaze held his, steady and calm. "Perhaps we have saved each other," she replied. Days passed, and life began to settle once more within the castle. Yet the bond between Alistair and Alara had shifted irreversibly. They worked together, lived together, and learned to navigate the delicate space between respect, longing, and trust. Neither rushed the other, neither demanded more than could be given. Their connection was quiet, powerful, and deeply intimate, built on shared trials and mutual understanding. One evening, they walked together in the castle gardens. Flowers were in full bloom, their colors vivid against the dark stone of the castle walls. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine and rose, and the sky above burned with the colors of sunset. "Alara," Alistair said, his voice breaking the peaceful silence, "I cannot undo the past, but I can promise you the future. I will serve, protect, and honor you in every way I can. I love you with every part of me." Alara stopped walking, turning to face him. Her eyes glimmered in the fading light. "And I have longed for this day," she said softly. "Not for your apology, but for your understanding. Not for your control, but for your respect. You have grown, Duke, and perhaps in time you may grow enough to walk beside me as an equal." Alistair took her hands in his, holding them gently. "I will grow," he promised. "For you, for us, and I will never make the mistakes of the past again." For the first time in years, there was no tension, no testing, no fear of failure. The bond between them, forged in fire, shadow, and magic, had become something unbreakable. They stood together, surrounded by flowers and moonlight, aware of the fragile yet undeniable power of trust and love. But even as they embraced this moment, both knew that the world would not remain calm forever. Political threats, ambitious nobles, and the lingering shadows of old magic were never fully gone. Yet the Duke and Alara were stronger now, united by trials that had tested every part of them, heart, mind, and soul. In the quiet that followed, they walked to the edge of the castle walls, overlooking the river that ran silver under the moonlight. The wind was gentle, carrying with it the scent of new beginnings. "Alara," Alistair said, his voice low and full of emotion, "I once sent you away. I dismissed you when I should have protected and valued you. Now I can only hope to be worthy of standing beside you." She rested her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You are worthy," she said softly. "Not because of your title nor your strength, but because you have learned. Love, trust, and respect are earned, Duke. You have done that." Their eyes met, and in that silent moment the years of pain, longing, and trials dissolved. They did not need to speak further. The lessons of the past had been learned, the trials of the present had been faced, and the future, uncertain as it might be, was theirs to shape together. The castle around them seemed to breathe with their triumph, the walls no longer shadows of pride but monuments to perseverance. Magic lingered in the air, faint and protective, a reminder that even the darkest forces could be challenged, transformed, and redirected by courage and understanding. Night fell, and the stars emerged, casting silver light across the gardens and towers. Alistair and Alara walked hand in hand, feeling the weight of the past but embracing the promise of the future. Every step was a choice, every glance a promise, every heartbeat a connection that could never be undone. And though storms might come again, political, personal, or magical, they would face them together, tempered by experience, trust, and a love that had been forged in shadow and trial. In the stillness of that spring night, they paused atop the highest tower, looking out over the lands of Eldoria. The rivers sparkled, the forests whispered, and the distant mountains held secrets yet to be discovered. They did not speak, for words were unnecessary. Their hearts, their eyes, and their hands spoke enough. Alara rested her head on Alistair's shoulder, feeling the steady strength of the man she had once loved and the one she now respected and trusted. Alistair held her close, feeling the warmth of the woman who had been dismissed, exiled, tested, and ultimately returned to claim her place, not beneath him, but beside him as an equal, as a partner, as a force in her own right. The world might never fully understand the bond they had forged, but in that moment, under the moon and stars, surrounded by the beauty of Eldoria, it did not matter. They had faced pride, fear, and magic and emerged together. They had learned to forgive, to trust, and to love. And in that love, they found not weakness but strength, the power to face any challenge, to navigate any storm, and to shape their destiny together. The northern wind whispered through the towers once more, carrying the promise of hope, renewal, and unbreakable bonds. The Duke and the woman he had once sent away stood together, victorious not only over external threats but over the shadows of their own hearts. The night was theirs, the world theirs, and their story, long, turbulent, and magical, was only just beginning.